I'm here in Kibworth today for a conversation with Roy Bills, member and steward of Kibworth Methodist Church at the age of 91. Roy is a well-known, well-loved and well-respected member of the community in Kibworth and is seen by many as the father figure of the Methodists here. Roy has served the church in many ways, most notably as a Methodist local preacher, preaching since he was a teenager over 70 years ago and fully accredited since 1952. Roy no longer preaches in the formal sense, but his life and witness continues to speak volumes about his faith. He is a very active member of the congregation here, both to the morning service and the afternoon gathering known as Space. That is until this year, which has been rather different for Roy and for all of us. Let's hear from Roy now. So Roy, this is your 92nd year, as we were just saying, this is your 92nd year. But it's probably not been the easiest year, I would imagine, for you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this year and what it's been like for you?
Well, it'll be a significant year for many people, I suppose. The fact that we had this pandemic break into us, but mine was a little more registered than that, really, because the second week in January, I fell. I was short of sugar, I think, on a Sunday afternoon. I'd been sitting in the chair and got up and was feeling my way around and felt staggering a bit. Went to the bathroom, preparing to get to Space, because I was always go to Space at 5 o'clock, and I fell. And I got tangled up with my right foot in the plumbing. I won't go into any more detail than that, but I really did hurt my foot, and I was on the floor. I couldn't get up. I was on low blood sugar, and I was in a real mess. And I was in that mess until, well, it must have been 9 o'clock at night. I was still on the floor. I managed to scramble some food from the fridge, but I'd not really gained sensible conversation. But I must have pressed my alarm button at that point, and the paramedics came. And they'd notified my daughter, and she came as well. So I was at least in somebody's hands. I was taken to the Leicestershire Infirmary, and all this is important because it colours the next 4 months, really. And I was taken to Leicestershire Infirmary, and they were looking at my foot, which was damaged quite well, I think. And they decided that they couldn't do anything with it because they were reading the monitor of my heart reactions, and they said, we cannot touch it, you'll have to go to Glenfield. So I went to Glenfield, and Glenfield I was there for over a week. I still hadn't had anything done to my foot, but in that time they decided they were going to fit a pacemaker, which they did, and then eventually, when they persuaded the Leicestershire Infirmary that they could do with me, they would be having me back. But I think the orthopaedics and the physicians don't always cooperate as quickly as they do. They don't like to have people on their hands for too long. Anyway, I got back to the Leicestershire Infirmary, and eventually they manipulated the foot, mend the bones, plastered me up to the knee, and so I was stuck there for some time. However, eventually at the end of February I got back to here, and within a week or so we had the pandemic breakdown. So there we are, we were in this position. I counted it fortunate, really, because the two coincided, so I was isolating myself in one sense and being at home recovering in the other. So the year went up to that point went well. And since then I've gone on. I've got myself walking, I've got myself involved as much as I can, and realised that, you know, I can't go on doing the things I was doing 10 years ago. But so the year's been pretty good, really. It's picked up from a bad start to a fine conclusion.
It's getting better then, yeah. It's getting better.
Can only get better.
Yeah, I'm always amazed, Roy, when you can describe something like what's happened to you, and yet you're so cheerful and happy in the way you talk about it. And what encourages you to keep going and to stay cheerful?
Well, I find that, you know, I obviously in a situation like this, I can say it's my faith, and I really do feel that God is with me on almost every level. We had difficult times a few years ago when Beth was diagnosed, and I suppose, you know, that was a test of who we were, really. And she was diagnosed with motor neurone disease, and that's a terminal illness in anybody's reckoning. So that was a blow to both of us, but we both had faith, and I think that, you know, that saw us through. I remember when we went to the various clinics that Beth had to attend. I remember the last one we went to, the professor was there, and half a dozen students were in with him, and they had the interview, and at the end of the interview the professor said, well, Mrs. Bills, thank you for coming. I don't think we shall see you, we want to see you again. And Beth sort of looked a bit startled and said, well, she said, I know I don't want to die, but I'm not afraid of dying. My faith will see me through. And that was a great encouragement to me and to her as well, I suppose. And so that was a hard blow to take. However, people were very kind to me. They looked after me. They nurtured me. They've mainly church people and family. Yeah. And you know, when this last setback with my broken foot and the pandemic, I was loved and cared for, really. So that's encouraging, and I find that you know, life has lots of good things to offer.
Well, you certainly loved Roy, and you loved in the church and in the community here at Kibworth. And you've been a local preacher in the Methodist Church for nearly 70 years. Since 1952 you were first accredited as a local preacher, and you're still a stalwart of the church in Kibworth, still a steward, in fact, and really the father of the chapel, really, in that respect, or should we say grandfather of the chapel. But you are deeply respected in Kibworth and in the circuit and in the surrounding area. Do you want to tell us a little bit about going right back to the 1950s, about your call to preach, and what was that like for you? How would you describe your call to a preaching ministry all those years ago?
Well, it was a lot before 1952. I reckon it was 1946. That just at the end of the war, I must have been 17 or 16 or 17 at that stage, and we had a group of young people who were very attached to the church. They hadn't got any AYC in those days, but they were, you know, all very faithful members of the youth club, and we were well led by a Christian person who was just that bit older than us. And so we all really got very involved in what was happening at the church. And I remember that we belonged also to a Christian Endeavour. It was very big in those days. I don't know whether there are any still today, but the Christian Endeavour was active. And every week we used to go to this Wednesday evening meeting, and they had a topic book. And of course everybody had to take a topic and lead the worship in that time. And so I was given a topic book at that time, and I had to do my turn, as one or two of the others did. And out of that group, there were 5 lads in the group and 1 girl. She was very loyal to us all. One of us had to marry her, but it wasn't me. But yes, we had the Wilson family. Now, Dr. David Dunn Wilson was one of that group, and he went on from his family to, he was an academic. And John, a close friend of mine, was his brother, and 2 twin brothers, and Ken Mumford, who lived in Whitney, and we were all mates together. And out of that group, 5 local preachers and preachers did in fact serve the Methodist Church, and have given, well, nearly 70 years to it, though Ken Mumford and I are the only 2 left at the moment. So we found that doing the topic and then having to leave home, I was given a note to preach. Now, I went out with a man called Arthur Shaw, and Arthur Shaw was very respected. He didn't work manually. My mother used to say, "Oh, Mr. Shaw, yes, he's in business," whatever that meant. Anyway, Arthur Shaw had me under his wing with a note to preach, and he set me a task of reading Paul's letter to James. One of the advice Paul gave to him was, do the work of an evangelist and fulfill your ministry. And I remember that because Arthur Shaw pointed that to me, that I want you to read this letter and put your name wherever James's name is mentioned. And so there I was, and within a few months I'd left Birch Coppice and Hayes Lane and Cradley Forge and all the other churches in that tiny black country district, and gone off to join the Air Force. And I ended up out east. At least I tell people I went out east, but it was East Anglia. And so when I got back here, back to Quarry Bank, I did a little bit of leading in worship in various other chapels, and then I went to Westminster College. And that's really where I got my theological education. I did a 3-year course in teacher training and a diploma in Christian education or religious education. So that was the grounding, and because of that, in those days I didn't sit the local preachers' exams. I had my usual interview about my faith in the circuit, and so I was put on the plan. But that was 1952. So it was Westminster that really clinched everything. Really, that was how I finally made the start in the church.
And then had a career in teaching, and
yes, I spent all. Well, I started off at Nottingham, and taught in a secondary boys' school there. Life was very good, and I enjoyed the 2 years I spent there. And but then I wanted to get back and teach in Leicester, so I got a school at on the Hinckley Road. It was called Wycliffe School, but that's converted now to a sports centre. But, yes, so I spent 28 years teaching in Leicestershire, but then I retired early, and because they were offering senior teachers chance to take early retirement, and I'd been diagnosed with diabetes and I wasn't controlling it very well, and so I was able to retire, and I've been retired as long as I taught.
You've done well.
so it'll be that'll be 40 years, 40 years next year.
Wow.
So that's my record, but I've forgotten whatever I knew in the days when I was teaching. I don't remember much of it now. This one as well, that you know, honour the calling that you have been chosen.
Yeah.
Or words to that effect. I can't remember.
Yeah.
So I've tried
live
to
a life worthy of that
honour
calling.
the calling.
Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, I'm sure you've done that very well, Roy. And when did you move to Kibworth, you and Beth?
Well, we moved really to Kibworth in 2000.
Yeah.
But we'd been living in Turlangton for 40 years, since early on in my career. I've been here and around since 1957, I think. So we're well established.
And been involved in the Methodist chapel here for that long, have you?
Oh, well, yes. Well, I was involved. We kept the congregational chapel open. They only had one member, Miss Timpson, and that one member, she had a Sunday school where every child came to the Sunday school, and it was, she dedicated her life to it, and we couldn't bear to see the place closed. So Beth and I kept the place with the help of one or two other friends, running for many years. But we kept it going for quite a time, and certainly while Miss Timpson was alive, that was good. But all the time I was preaching in, you know, the churches in this circuit, when there were 5 or 6 of them. I remember I used to preach in villages around as well. And I always feel sometimes I've preached in those villages until they closed. Now, whether it had any significance, but we used to go to. Once you got on the secretary list, they wanted you every 12 months. And I remember I was preaching 7 or 8 times a quarter, and it really was. Very hard work. How my wife put up with it, I don't know. But she was very loyal and supported me and looked after the family and kept them going. In fact, she used to go and worship on a Sunday afternoon with the church in the Congregationalist, and I used to go to the prison. And there's a story in the family that Julian answered the phone one Sunday afternoon, and they said, "Was Mummy and Daddy there?" And no, he says, "Mummy's gone to church and Daddy's gone to prison." so that's a story that we unearthed at various times. But yes, it was it was an active time, and of course, being young and active, I worked my way through all the offices in the circuit, and and then when I'd done all that, and then I got older and I started offices in the district. So I was on various committees, and I've been active in many areas. And I still remember going through the list. They would all have some social concern. I spent time doing CAB work when I first retired. I spent some time doing work with the probation people, community service people, and that was time consuming. So I feel that, you know, in my 40 years of volunteering, I've had a lot of experience. And then I went to the prison as a visitor, and Victor Martin was the minister and he was chaplain there. And he said, "Oh, you ought to go and be a visitor, prison visitor." And which I did, and I did that for several years. Then I went into the parole section of the prison work, and then I moved up to the Board of Visitors, which is the independent monitoring board now. And life's been pretty full and pretty hectic, and I think I've done as much as I could to move the world along a bit.
So how have you found going back to church the way things are at the moment for the services that we've been doing since August?
Yeah, I've been thinking, you know, I have been I did routine, I suppose. I have been a regular attender at every service, and I thought back the other week when I was having to select which one I went to. I thought, well, I never thought this would happen, and but that's it worked. I like the type of worship that we're having to adjust to, and it's gone very well. I as I say, as you said, I went to both the harvest services, and they're lovely, and I think having some music there as well, that's good to hear. But I remember when we used to go 3 times on a Sunday, and this is a very different change and pattern, isn't it, nowadays? But I'm sure things will settle down, and we shall find new ways of approaching worship, and but it'll certainly have done us no harm to adjust ourselves to meet the new demands, because
about when you were a 17-year-old in a youth club. I mean, we have some young people in our circuit today. What would be your message to them, to those young people maybe thinking about their faith at the moment?
Well, I would encourage them to seek what God has to say to them, and if they can do it in fellowship with other Christians, that will strengthen their faith as well, because John Wesley had never thought of anybody as a solitary Christian. You do need others. Stick together. Stay in MAYC or Fish or whatever it's called at Harborough. But I mean, a church without young people is it's going to have a lonely few years if we can't attract more families to come back and worship with us.
Well, thank you, Roy, for sharing all of those thoughts with us. Thank you for sharing something of your life story, really, and we've got to know you a bit better through this. And I do think it's a shame you're not still in our pulpits today around the circuit, but we quite understand that. That when you do get to nearly 92, then perhaps you deserve a rest.
Yes, I think I shouldn't make a very good poor showing of circuit now. I'd have to go on making walking sticks.
Well, I'm sure that's very good as well. But can I pray for you? Can I pray for you now, Roy?
Certainly. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Loving God, we thank you for Roy and his ministry over so many years, the way that you have led him and guided him, blessed him and his wife Beth, and the family, and the way Roy has been such a beacon of light in this area, through his teaching, his preaching, his prison work and work in other social areas as well, through the friendships that he's built up, the fellowship groups that he's part of, and the example of faith that he gives to so many by his cheerful presence in this village and his encouragement to those of younger generations. We thank you for him and ask that you bless him and keep him safe, keep him well in these difficult times, and help us all to learn from his example and the example of your saints who've gone before us. In Jesus' name, Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you for the opportunity. I'm very hesitant about saying yes, but I'm sure you'll pick out any little gems that might be there. And
no, there's lots of gems, Roy. Lots of gems. Yeah.